Pray to What Earth by Henry David Thoreau. Pray to what earth does the sweet cold belong, which asks no duties and no conscience. The moon goes up by leaps her cheerful path in some far summer stratum of the sky, while stars in their cold shine bedot her way. The fields gleam mildly back upon the sky, and far and near upon the leafless shrubs, the snow dust still emits a silver light. Under the hedge where drift banks are screened, the titmice now pursues their downy dreams. As often in the sweltering summer nights, the bee doth drop asleep in the flower cup. When evening overtakes him with his load, by the brooksides in the still genial night, the more adventurous wanderer may hear the crystals shoot and form, and winter slow increase his rule by gentlest summer means. We gather here today, as we have done each Sunday, seeking a higher purpose, a life that is filled with depth, a depth that is sought together with each individual and spiritual path converging in support and love. In Unitarian Universalism, you can bring your whole self, your full identity, your questioning mind, your expansive heart. Together, we create a force more powerful than any one person or one belief system. As Unitarian Universalists, we do not have to check our personal backgrounds and beliefs at the door. We join on a journey that honors everywhere we've been. These eloquent and insightful words come by way of our speaker today. I am honored to present Matthew Pargeter-Villarreal. The virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Teresa. Good morning, everybody at Mosaic UU. It is a pleasure to be back and live and in person this time as opposed to pre-recorded. Henry David Thoreau is probably, for me, the most puzzling and strangely interesting figure of all of the transcendentalist luminaries that we count as heroes of our Unitarian Universalist history. Anyone who decides to drop everything and announces that they are going to go live in a cabin in the middle of the Massachusetts wilderness in order to truly experience life earns a certain degree of enigmatic status in my book. I sometimes wonder what the figure of Thoreau would look like walking through the door of one of our modern-day UU churches. I have the image of a gaunt, older gentleman, well-worn, yet still with an air of distinction, probably heavily tanned from being outdoors, wearing a bandana around his head and hiking shorts, Chaco sandals on his feet, and carrying a backpack with all of his worldly possessions, or lack thereof, stuffed piecemeal inside. The kind of person that sometimes shows up at the UU service, usually coming in during the middle and sitting in one of the back rows, where you're not entirely sure if they got out of bed intending to dress like that, or if they got done with a 10-mile hike and just so happened to be walking by a UU church that was having a service and on a whim decided to peek their head in and check it out. I always wonder if this is the way that my Christian colleagues view me as I walk through the door whenever I gather together with them in interdenominational spaces. I probably seem like the wild and crazy outsider. Unicorn keychain hanging off of my backpack. Okay, let's be real, there are several unicorn keychains. HRC sticker on the back of my laptop, dressed in chonkless and shorts, and a graphic t-shirt that usually includes a funny and slightly snarky political message. And yet, just like Thoreau and his immaculate prose, we are just as comfortable discussing Christian scripture and Greco-Roman philosophy as we are discussing the Bhagavad Gita, various types of plants and wild animals, and Joss Whedon's Firefly. I'm well aware that Thoreau never watched or knew the existence of Firefly, but I have a sneaking suspicion that he would have if it had been around in his day. Thoreau, to me, is the living embodiment of the fourth principle of Unitarian Universalism, a free and responsible search for truth in meaning. In the opening chapter of Walden, Thoreau wrote that to be a philosopher is not merely to have subtle thoughts, nor even to have found a school, but to so love wisdom as to live according to its dictates, a life of simplicity, independence, magnanimity, and trust. It is to solve some of the problems of life not only theoretically, but practically. He would go on to say that the true philosopher is not fed, sheltered, clothed, warmed like his contemporaries, but maintains his vital heart by better methods than other men. What I hear through Thoreau's words is that theology and philosophy alone serves as something that can inform one's worldview and character, but it is up to the individual to fill in and color the rest. This comes through lived experience and the encounters that one has along the wild and crazy journey that we call life. It is very much something that is forever still in progress. Thoreau, like many of his contemporaries, was very highly and well educated. He attended Harvard along with his brother and graduated top of his class in 1837. His graduation coincided with a time in American history when the United States was facing the midst of an economic depression, and jobs were not easy to come by for many recent college graduates. Sound familiar? Of the jobs that were historically filled by Harvard graduates, ministry, the law, medicine, and teaching, Thoreau found himself, in his words, temperamentally unsuited for the first three. But as his siblings were already working as teachers, he decided to try that out. He promptly resigned 2 weeks later, after getting into a fight with the Concord superintendent over the issue of how to discipline unruly children. Thoreau's unstoppable maverick spirit convinced him to try and establish his own school, which he did with his brother John in 1838, although he was forced to close the school in 1841 after John became ill and later died. It was at this point that fate intervened. Thoreau was invited to become the live-in handyman to a Concord gentleman who would become his friend and mentor, a writer by the name of Ralph Waldo Emerson. It was Emerson who gave him the land along the shore of Walden Pond, upon which he built the makeshift cabin that would become his home as he began to write his first book that he was planning to title A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers. He ended up staying for 2 years, and his book ended up becoming the beginning and the inspiration for the iconic memoir that was to come. Thoreau's self-imposed isolation would spark the impetus to creativity that his lost and wayward soul was looking for. He frequently went on nature walks in the Massachusetts countryside and compiled extensive and exhaustive field notes of things that he came across on his journey. He would develop these ideas into longer essays that he would submit for publication in local magazines that would bring him a modest salary of earning that he would use to support his meager but comfortable life in Walden. Thoreau amassed a consistent literary output on a variety of different subjects. He contributed to travel journals about Cape Cod and Mount Katahdin in Maine, and produced articles and treatises in support of abolitionism and the fugitive slave law, and against the fugitive slave law and the execution of John Brown, in addition to frequent lectures and speaking engagements. He would eventually move back into Emerson's house, and finally into a room in his parents' house where he would end up succumbing to tuberculosis in 1862 at the age of 45. Much of Thoreau's indomitable spirit lives on today in the digital landscape of the modern era. The future generations of young people taking the bold and maverick risk to not follow the traditional jobs and lifestyles of their parents, and to make money and lives for themselves as influencers, content creators, and digital nomads, may not necessarily be maintaining their vital heart by better methods than other men, as Thoreau was envisioning it, but they are certainly taking the bold step out into their own wilderness in order to live practically and make something out of their lives by their own means. And they are choosing to live their lives in a way that Thoreau, if he is watching from the great beyond, cannot help but watch with a wry smile across his face. My own Thoreau-like experience came this summer as my husband and I moved away from the hustle and chaos of Fort Worth and into the wilderness of Comfort, Texas. As aptly as the name of the town describes itself, it was certainly a much needed yet decidedly different change of pace from what we were both used to. After sheltering in place for nearly 5 months, I was eager to do something to get back to work and feel like a productive and contributing member of the household again, while still staying at home and keeping my family safe. Unlike the conscious decision to escape to my own private Walden, my Thoreau experience came in the form of a conversation that was initially meant as a joke. Having spent nearly 3 years providing pulpit supply in person to North Texas UU congregations and thoroughly enjoying the work, I mentioned to my husband on the car on the way down how it would be really cool, especially considering that all in-person worship gatherings were virtual through at least the first part of 2021, if there was a way to do virtual pulpit supply over Zoom for UU churches. So we sat down and tried an experiment. I wrote a template email explaining the services that I was offering, and we sent it out to every congregation in every state that was listed on the UUA website and waited to see if anyone would take us up on the offer. For months, our experiment yielded little to no results. Many congregations were blessed with proactive worship committees that had seen to it that they were booked up through the rest of the year. And then, all of a sudden, I received an email from a congregation in Georgia that was looking to renew its welcoming congregation status that year and was looking for a speaker for an LGBTQIA+ themed service. I quickly replied back that I would be happy to be their speaker, and just like that, I had my first gig. And then the proverbial floodgates burst wide open. And all I could do was act like Noah and brace myself for the great flood and wherever it was going to take me. It got to the point where every morning I was opening my email to multiple requests from churches of all different sizes. I was soon leading multiple Sunday services in different states and different time zones all at the same time. If I wasn't doing something to prepare for the services I had that week, I was likely writing sermons and planning worship for services I had that were coming up in several weeks. The influx of work and the ability to now work from home had an effect on me as a minister. I went from a recent seminary graduate who nonchalantly picked up a few speaking engagements to being an active and working minister. It also had an effect on my notoriously bad organizational skills. I became someone who now knew their way around a calendar and a planner and routinely checked both of them. I invested myself more into my website, adding regular contributions to my long dormant blog. I hate to give any credit to the coronavirus pandemic, and I'm not sure that I would go so far as to say that COVID-19 is responsible for the new and positive direction that my ministry has gone in. But just like Thoreau's quote at the beginning of Walden, I was certainly living more practically than I had been. I was now making things happen in a way that helped to make my ministry relevant at a time when so much was and still is uncertain, and there was a realistic fear for many UU congregations, the majority of whom are between 50 to 150 members, whether they were going to be able to survive and just what the future would look like if they did. The experience also sparked a myriad of philosophical questions that began to spiral around in my head. As a faith tradition that prides itself on the beauty and the strength of its existence as an intentional community, how was it that we were to be that community for our members and friends in a time when, out of necessity, we are more isolated than ever before? Technology is a blessing, but connection through Zoom can only go so far and cannot make up for the power of human connection and interaction. How do we continue to be a source of hope and inspiration when even we do not know that there is an end in sight to dark and uncertain times? course, I was frustrated to find that dear Henry David had already penned an immortal quote that answered all of my musings and misgivings. A quick Google search brought me to the powerful one-liner, "In wilderness is the preservation of the world." In wilderness is the preservation of the world. The beauty is that we do not have all of the answers to how things will turn out, and we are not expected to. As Thoreau illustrates in his quote, the answers are somewhere out in the wilderness. All we are expected to do is journey along in search of them. There was a point at the beginning of this pandemic when that answer would not have been good enough for me, and I would be left with a sense of anxiety and dread. And full disclosure, that feeling is still very much there. But I am not as afraid of stepping into the unknown and the wilderness as I once was. And I invite you all to come along with me. I am not sure of the answers that we will find, but I am sure that our journey together will make the preservation of the world that much more meaningful to all of us along the way. May it be so. Blessed be. Amen. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum. Namaste. Thank you all for being my companions along the journey.